Hello everyone, this is Jeremy with TacFix. What I'm bringing you today is a Glock disassembly, reassembly video, and also basic field cleaning. One of the reasons I really like the Glock platform is just how versatile they are. You can get everything from pretty much a bone stock Glock, like this Glock 30 here. This is a Gen 3. This one has had a couple modifications. It's had a laser light added into the guide rod assembly, and it has these pierced grips on the bottom here. Good thing about some little things like that is it gives you a rest here for your pinky that you can use so your pinky doesn't trail off the bottom there. I know that annoys me when I'm shooting these subcompacts. But other than that, this one's pretty much stock. You're not going to find any enhancements that are too drastic on this one. So these are great gun even stock. So that's one good thing about the Glock is they are a very reliable platform. Obviously, most people know that. That is something that really attracts a lot of buyers to them. But one of the great things about Glock is it's also heavily customizable. You can see this is my own Glock 19. This is a Gen 4. So this is the compact size in 9mm. And I've done a lot to this one. This one is not stock by any means. I have done work with the connector and springs in the trigger system to give it a lighter, not too lighter, but just a little bit lighter and much more consistent trigger pull. This one pulls at 4.5 pounds almost every time on the dot. Whereas a stock trigger, when I still had stock springs, stock connector, stock everything in my trigger system, I would get a 5-pound pull, a 6.5-pound pull, a 5-pound pull, a 5.5-pound pull. It varied all over. It varied really as much as 2 pounds, one end of the spectrum to the other. And I didn't like that about my Glock. There's a lot of good things about this platform, but an inconsistent trigger is definitely one of the downfalls. There are a lot of things though that you can do to this platform. I've done a lot of trigger work, like I said. I've also done the first thing that a lot of people do with Glocks, replace the sights. These are Vickers Tactical Elite sights from Wilson Combat. They're amazing sights. They've got small tritium in the front, small tritium in the rear, tritium in the front. So they're very, very quick to pull. And at nighttime, they are very easy to acquire in the dark. That's one thing I really like about these. I've also done a lot of other things. I obviously added a light to the front here. This is an Olight PL2 Valkyrie. This is an excellent light. It puts out a substantial amount of power and has a bunch of different settings. You got momentary on, all the way on. You can even do a strobe. So there's a lot of different accessories you can get for this rail. I also added a compensator to the front. This does increase its length substantially. As you can see, it's adding about an extra 1.5 inches to the front of the gun. This is really no longer a concealable gun. Initially, I bought this to be my everyday carry piece. I've since transitioned to a different gun that I carry on a regular basis. So this one's more of a range toy. And that's one of the good things, like I said about Glock, is so many different options you can do to customize it and make it fit yourself. I've also done stippling myself on the grip, shaved down the little bumpy texture that they have. You can see very similar to what the Gen 3 has on the back here. But I did my own stippling, did that on here. Did even front cuts to aid in getting a nice solid purchase on the grip. Added a mag well. Nothing too substantial. I didn't want something that was going to really impact if I wanted to run this from a holster. Just something thin that would aid in doing magazine change so that you can easily get that in there and get it in there quick and in a very repeatable fashion. Also switched out to do a more aggressive slide lock here. This one has it's an extended model from Vickers Tactical, so that one is much nicer to run here. Got the pretty much standard magazine release here. I don't have too many problems with those. Granted, I don't have huge hands, and with some guns, my thumbs being a little bit shorter, they can be hard to actuate, but the Glock ones I've never really had a problem with, so I didn't replace that out. But that's most of the customization I've done to this one. And this is really just more, like I said, just a fun range toy here. So I don't use this one conceal and carry anymore. I could take the light off, leave it on, make a holster for it, But mostly if I wanted to carry this again, I'd be taking off the comp. But with a range toy, obviously you can have a little bit more fun. So that's kind of what I've done to that pistol. But back to kind of what we're talking about today, disassembly and reassembly. One of the good things about Glock is if you know how to disassemble and reassemble one, you know how to disassemble and reassemble the other ones. They're all very, very similar. In fact, almost completely the same. All of them have generally the same number of pins with the exception of Gen 1. Gen 1 only had 2 pins, one in the front, one in the rear. Gen 2 through now 5 all have 3 pins, so far as I'm aware. I have not held a Gen 5, so don't quote me on that, but 2 through 4, same pin configuration, internals mostly the same, all at least the same enough that you can easily transfer the skills from one gen to another, and it'll feel just like the same gun, taking it apart and putting it together. I'm going to work with my gun here, just because I am more familiar with this one. I do know that this has been well maintained. Everything is in good working order, so we're going to use this one to disassemble and reassemble. And there's a few things you're going to need if you're going to do this. There's actually very little that you do need in order to be able to take this apart. You can do it with very little. In fact, a lot of people do it with just this kind of tool, just a pin pusher. This isn't something that you need. It is very good. There's a lot of other things you can use. You can use a punch, things like that, but Glock gives you one in your pack generally when you buy a new gun. This one is an aftermarket one. I like the grip a little bit better on this one from Ghost Inc., so I do like this. And most everything that I'm going to show you today, I'm going to have links for on the video or on my blog, tacfix.wordpress.com. So you're going to be able to find links to most of the stuff that I show you today, if not all of it. But beyond just a basic pin pusher, I like to have a little bitty flat-bladed screwdriver. That's going to help you in getting the slide plate off back here. It's good to just kind of get it in there and wiggle that right out, because those can be a little bit tough to get off. I also use these little bamboo skewers to push the extractor plunger out. Not absolutely crucial to have, but a lot of people will, for the same purpose, they'll use those long cotton swabs that they sell in a lot of firearms cleaning kits. I don't like those just because they are more expensive than buying these, and I don't actually use the cotton swab end of it, so for me that's kind of a waste to buy those. So these are pretty cheap, penny or two a piece in a pack from the grocery store or from Walmart, and you've got little probe pusher tools that are really great in my opinion. I like to use those. You also probably want to have a pair of needle nose pliers. These are good for when you got a stuck pin, getting those pulled out, so that's a good thing to have. I also pretty much exclusively use bore snakes to clean my barrels. There are a lot of other methods that you can use. You can use a cleaning rod and cleaning swabs, but I find those to be more of a hassle, so these I really do like to use. So we're going to show using that method to clean. It's also a good idea to have a bench block. This is a really inexpensive universal bench block, can be used on a lot of different models of rifle parts and handgun parts. This one's from Wheeler Engineering. I'll have a link for that in the description, definitely. It's also good to have a cheater to help you get a stuck pin out, things like that. I like this particular model. It's got a rubber end and a plastic non-marring end. Both of these are going to be good to work on guns because you're not going to have metal against metal potentially marring your finish. Another thing you can get in place of this particular one, this is just a little cobalt model from my local Lowe's. So these are really easy to find if you've got a Lowe's near you. Home Depot sells ones very similar in their Husky brand, but I like this particular one because of the weight, the size, and the materials that are used on the two ends. You can also get what's called a dead blow hammer. That's, technically speaking, the gunsmith specific one, not necessarily specific, but it's what most gunsmiths will use in place of something like that. The difference with a dead blow hammer is it's got usually a powder inside the head of the hammer that's providing the weight. And for me, I feel that this works just as well, and this is a much less expensive option, so I go with that. You're also going to want to have lubricant. You can't clean your gun without good lubricant. This is something where I like to have two different kinds on hand. I like to have an aerosol and a liquid. Reason for that is because the aerosol is good for cleaning the outside of surfaces, spraying into the nooks and crannies, and really getting everything clean. And then it's good to follow up when you're done with a liquid lubricant, specifically one that has a metal needle end like this for applying your lubricant, because you can really get into the little nooks and crannies and apply just a little single drop of oil in just the spot that you want to have it in. So that's a good thing to have. And brands aren't really important. You know, this is G96 brand. This one is Zero Friction from ProShot, but for my money, I haven't found a gun-specific lubricant that I wouldn't use again. I think for the most part they are all very, very similar. Obviously there are going to be differences from brand to brand, but for the most part they all do the job. If you want to use rim oil, you want to use G96. All of it's really good. Frog Lube I've also used is really good, but it's fairly pricey, so I tend to stick to these two brands because they're inexpensive and they do work great. They seem to keep my guns lubricated very well and for a good long time, even if I get a little lazy with cleaning. Another thing you can do is get some of these shop towels. These you can get any local hardware store, automotive store, even Walmart will sell these in the automotive section. These are basically a really thick paper towel if you've never used them before. They're a lot more cloth-like than paper-like, and they really handle tough grease and rougher jobs very well without ripping and leaving fragments behind. That's really the big thing, is not leaving the fragments of paper behind, because that will gum up your gun quicker than anything. So definitely do not use paper towels. Either use something like an old undershirt that you have worn out, you're no longer going to use anymore, cut that up for rags, or get something like this. Those are really good. And the last thing you can talk about here, this isn't something necessarily part of cleaning, but one thing I like to do with the internals of all my guns, granted this one has been shot a little bit since the last time I did it, so it won't look quite as shiny as when I first did it, but you can get yourself a little Dremel polishing wheel like this and some mag and aluminum polish. This one's Mother's brand from Walmart. It's really inexpensive one. You definitely want to stick with a mag and aluminum or something comparable to that. There are a lot of different kinds of polish out there. Some of them have higher grit to them and can actually damage internal parts. So you want to get something that's very, very mild. You want to get something that's made for your softer metals so that it won't mar up the finish or leave scratches. And also won't stay stuck down in there. So I like to use these. And the good thing about polishing some of your internals, like your connector bars, which we'll go over all these parts in just a minute, but like polishing your connector bar, your trigger bar, your internal pins, and the underside of the firing pin safety, all of those will provide, and of course your rails, all of those will provide a slick surface for all the gun parts to move on, so that they just have a lower friction coefficient. So they're just going to be a lot more smooth and reliable in their operation. Okay, so now we're going to move on to disassembly of the firearm. First thing you want to do anytime you're going to disassemble or work on your firearm is do a safety check. So the first thing we're going to do is depress the magazine release and remove the magazine, our source of ammo. Then we're going to pull our slide back so that the slide cutout lines up with the slide lock, and we're going to press up on that to lock our slide back. Then we're going to do a visual and a physical inspection of the chamber, make sure there are no rounds. Once we're satisfied that there are no rounds in the weapon, we'll pull our slide back forward, point our gun in a safe direction, and pull the trigger. All Glocks require that you pull the trigger in order to be able to disassemble your firearm and take the slide from the frame. Next, we're going to adopt what's called an armorer's grip. The webbing of your fingers, of your hand in between your thumb and forefinger is going to go up into the tang, and then your hands are going to go over just like this. This allows you to slightly pull the slide to the rear. We only want to pull it back about 1/4 of an inch so that we can then grab our slide lock levers right here on either side, pull down, and that'll release our slide. And we're going to set our frame to the side because we're going to start with our slide. Now the first step in disassembling your slide after getting it off the frame is going to be to remove your guide rod. Your guide rod and spring assembly all come off as one piece. We're going to set that to the side. And then we need to remove the barrel. To do that, I like to come up underneath like this and lift it and slide it forward, and then you can easily slide your barrel out. From here, this is all the more you need to field strip your slide and frame in order to clean it for just normal day-to-day cleaning. You need to have it in 5 pieces: your slide, your frame, barrel, guide rod and spring assembly, and your magazine. You can also optionally disassemble your magazine. We'll go over that at the end of the video. But from here, this is all you need to do to strip your slide in order to clean it. But we're going to do a detailed disassembly, so we're going to move on from here. From here, you're going to take your Glock armorer's tool, and we're going to pull our striker back to the rear. You're going to hear that audible click. That'll tell you that it's slightly disengaged the striker safety. Once you've got it pulled back, you're going to need 2 tools. I find it's easy to use my Glock tool and a small screwdriver. Usually a flathead is what you want to go with. And what I'll do is I will take my Glock tool, and you can see a very small piece of polymer. That's your striker sleeve right in there. You're going to take and you're going to pull that towards the front of the slide. Then you'll take the blade of your screwdriver and work it in right underneath the back of your slide. And you're going to remove your slide plate. Now what this does is this is going to expose your safety plunger, your extractor plunger, excuse me, and its spring and detent. It's also going to expose your entire striker assembly. So we're going to remove those 2 pieces. These should both come as one full piece. Here you have your extractor plunger, extractor spring, and its detent or bearing. Here you have your striker. This is the entire assembly of your striker. You have striker, this plastic piece up here in the front. These are your spring caps. These are what hold the spring onto the striker assembly. Obviously you've got your striker spring and your striker sleeve. Now, the easy way to disassemble this is to put it on your tabletop like this, and you're going to pull your springs down just like that. That's going to allow you to take off your spring cups, and these just slide right out. So we can put those to the side. From there, the spring comes right off, the sleeve comes off of your striker, and then you've got your striker separately. Next thing we're going to worry about, we're going to go ahead and take out the extractor and the striker safety and spring. Now, in order to do that, I like to hold it so that the extractor is facing down into my hand, and then I can just press with my Glock tool right onto the striker safety. That's going to allow your extractor to come right out. And then your striker safety and spring. And that is a completely disassembled slide. Now, for the purpose of this video, we are not going to take off our sights. We're also not going to take off this comp. Most of the time when you're looking at a Glock, you're not going to have a comp on there, so we're going to, for the purpose of this video, we're going to pretend it's not there. And for general cleaning and maintenance, there's almost never a need to take off the sights, so we're going to leave those on. The only time you're really going to take off your sights is if you're replacing them with a different set. I have these Vickers Tactical Elites from Wilson Combat. I'm pretty happy with these sights, so obviously I'm not going to take them off. So we're done with our slide for right now. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the frame. Now, the first thing you want to do with your frame is take out your pins. You've got 3 pins. You've got your rear trigger pin, you've got your locking block pin, and you've got your front trigger pin. So we're going to go ahead and take those out. And depending on how old your Glock is, this Glock is fairly new, they may just come out with pressure from your Glock tool, or you may need to give it a little bit of help. Another thing you can do is if your frontmost trigger pin's being a little not one to come out there, you can take and lift up on your slide stop here and wiggle that, and that can cause it to come free. There we go. Once your front two pins are out, your slide stop can come right out. And then this one back here almost never needs any little pressure from a hammer. That one you can usually get right out. Of course I say that and maybe it won't, but there we go. Now, on your 3 pins here, your 3 pins are easy to tell apart. The featureless pin right here, it's got no little cutouts, no grooves, no nothing like that. That goes in the rearmost section of your firearm. And then from here, the size difference is the easiest way. Obviously there are differences in the grooves and how they're set up, but the size difference is the easiest way to tell where they go. This pin goes in the top, this pin goes in the bottom here. Their size makes it easy for them to be told apart. From here, now that we've got all our pins out, most of the firearm is going to finish coming apart. We can go ahead and lift up on the trigger assembly and then remove our locking block. Now that we've removed its pin, the locking block comes right out. And the rest of our trigger assembly is going to come out. Now, for nearly all maintenance you're ever going to do, this is all the further you need to disassemble your frame. In fact, unless you have gotten some pretty good armorer's knowledge on your Glock, you really shouldn't take it apart any further than this. Most everything you're going to need to replace on a Glock, most everything I've ever replaced on a Glock, can be done from this level of disassembly. Now, you can remove your slide stop lever if you need to. That's pretty easy. You're just going to depress it down and then push it out. And it'll just slide straight out one direction. We're not going to go ahead and remove it for this video because that almost never needs to be replaced. The spring in there is very durable. It's got a little detent, or excuse me, a little spring down here that's a flat steel spring. I've actually never seen one of those break. So removing this is probably not going to be something you're ever going to need to do. But this trigger you may need to disassemble a little bit further. Now obviously you can tell I've shined mine up quite a bit. It is a little dirty here. We're going to clean that in the next segment of the video. But I have taken and used that mother's polish that we saw in the last segment of the video, and I've polished up my entire trigger bar and the cruciform back here, as well as this section of the rear trigger where it helps extract. Having some of your parts shined, including your rail segments here, that really does aid in the function of the firearm. I noticed a lot smoother action when I did that. So taking a Dremel with just a polishing wheel, we don't want to do any grinding, we just want to polish it and shine it up. That's really going to help create a slick surface for everything to run on. Now, let's say you did want to replace some parts in here. You know, there are a lot of aftermarket springs and connector bars that you can get that will either lower the weight of your trigger pull or increase its reliability. I've done a little bit of that here. So what you want to do is you're going to lift up on your trigger bar until the cruciform is level with the top of your rear trigger section here, and then you're just going to wiggle that right out. And from here you can replace springs. This one I do have a lower power spring. I have reduced the weight of my trigger just a little bit. It was pulling about the normal 5 to 6 pounds that a Glock is known for. Mine pulls at about 4 right now. I get anywhere from about 3 1/4 to 4 1/4, or excuse me, 3 3/4 to 4 1/4. So I do find that it also, having the lighter trigger pull, having some of these aftermarket parts from Zev Technologies has increased both the reliability and just the shootability of the firearm. So I like having a little bit lighter trigger. Now this is a range toy. You know, I don't carry this for defensive purposes anymore. It's generally not advisable to reduce the power of your spring if you are going to be carrying this for a defensive purpose. There are a lot of reasons for that. You know, with a lighter trigger pull, you can have some reliability issues. That depends on your platform and the quality of the parts that you're putting in. You can also have some legal issues. You know, if you get into a defensive shooting situation and it's found that you've done a lot of modifications, that can impact, you know, how a jury perceives you in a court. Now, I am not a lawyer. Don't take that as legal advice. That is just what I have been told, both from members of the shooting community and from lawyers. So I'm repeating what I have heard. I am not a lawyer, though, so do not take that as legal advice. But that's pretty much all the further you need to take apart your trigger for normal cleaning. Obviously, if we have this out and we were going to replace the connector bar, the connector bar is also very easy to service. All you do is basically just lift up on it and it comes right out. Once you have disassembled it this far, I'm actually going to switch to a little flat blade screwdriver. You can actually get that under there and just wiggle that bad boy right out, and then you can replace your connector bar. This one is also one from Zev Technologies. This is their not cut out version. So this in conjunction with a replacement of the rear trigger spring has helped me get that lighter trigger pull. So definitely something to check out if you're wanting to put together a kind of a fun range toy gun. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back together, since for most part you're not going to need to take this apart. You also want to make sure that you check on the orientation of the springs. When you've got your springs like this particular spring in the rear here does go in only this direction. So you want to make sure that the top loop on your spring here is going in a counterclockwise fashion into the lower section of your cruciform. And you want to make sure that the spring section over here is going in a counterclockwise fashion around the rear of this rear trigger section. And then we're just going to reassemble this here. Now, the last thing you can do, the only time that you should ever need to release your magazine stop, your magazine release, and switch that around is if you are, like I have done, switching it over to be left-hand friendly. All these guns, obviously, since the majority of the population is right-handed, are going to be set up for a right-handed shooter. Some guns, like this Glock, are reversible. This is a Gen 4, so starting with the Gen 4 and now the Gen 5, they do have a reversible magazine release. So I do really like that, so I did switch that around. In order to do that, I'm going to see if we can set this up so we can see down into here. You're going to have a small spring, and this is basically just spring steel. I'm going to see if we can get it in there. There is a little spring bar right in there, and you'll just take your screwdriver, pull that up, and then your magazine release pops right out. Flip it around and put your steel spring back in there. The other reason you might take this out is if you're replacing with an aftermarket one. This one is the standard Glock Gen 4 one, so I have not found the need to do that. Even having shorter thumbs like I do for the size of my hand, I find no problem in actuating that magazine release. So I have not found the need to go with an aftermarket extended one. So that is complete disassembly of the firearm. In the next segment, we're going to go in and we're going to reassemble. All right, so now we're going to move on to reassembling our firearm. And the good thing about this is it's just do everything you already did in reverse. So we're going to start by putting in our trigger assembly. That snaps right into place. You want to make sure everything is nice and level and seated, and your trigger is all the way in and depressed to the rear. Next thing I like to do is take care of my slide stop. Now that's going to rest right here in this groove, obviously. So what we got to do is we got to work in the spring and metal piece right beside our trigger here. We're just going to slide that right in. Sometimes you got to work it in there just a little bit, but it should be Here we have our trigger shoe. The metal piece and spring should be down right in between the trigger shoe and the side of your frame. Once we've got that in place, what I like to do is then move on to my locking block. And that's just going to slide right down into your frame and push down in place right over your slide stop and spring. Then we can move on to our pins. Now there's no set order you have to do these in. I like to start with my rearward pin, but to each their own. Do this to your own preference. Now, one thing about resetting your pins, you want to make sure that they're fairly even on both sides. So we can see we've got slight protrusion on that side, but not on the other. So I'm going to push that in just a little bit so we can get it nice and seated. Then I like to start with my larger of the two pins. And to aid in getting that larger pin back in, you can again actuate that slide stop. Sometimes you need to give a little bit of help. There we go. That's something you got to be careful of. That just pushed our slide stop out of place. So we're going to check, make sure everything's lined up, and push that right into place. Make sure we've got evenness on both sides, and then move on to our last pin here. That one usually slides right in, mostly with thumb pressure. And then we're just going to seat it. Still got a little ways to go on that side. This one you should feel a little bit of pressure change when it seats. There we go. That looks good. So from there, we have our frame completely reassembled. So now we're going to move on to reassembling our slide. From here, I always like to start with reassembling my striker. That's just kind of personal preference. You're going to take and you're going to slide the sleeve over the striker and then over the rear protrusion on the striker. And then one thing I like to do is you can take and slide the sleeve with the rear protrusion over to the side like this. So that'll provide a stable base for you to reassemble your whole assembly here. Take the spring, pull that right down over the top, and we're going to reassemble our spring caps. These can be a little tricky at first, but you just want to get them right down into the spring just like that. Make sure you don't lose grip on your spring here like I just did, and then get your other one in there. You need to have both for it to retain that, and then release gently, and your striker assembly is all put back together. Then what we're going to do is move on to the extractor. Now, one thing you want to make sure of is that you put your extractor plunger assembly in first. That way you can make good contact with your extractor. And when you're putting your extractor in, there is only one way to put this in. You'll notice if you look inside here, the face where the extractor sits on the bottom is slightly sloped downward. And you'll notice your extractor also has that shape. So what you want to do is you want to make sure the round portion here, you got a flat portion and a round portion on the inside of your extractor. You're going to make sure that goes into the round hole right there, and that your extractor plunger pushes right on the side there where that lip is. So we're going to put that right in, slide that into place, and you want to see your plunger just a little bit here. And then what I like to do is get a hold of it, place my thumb over the extractor. That way I can then take my striker safety, put that right over the top there. And you're gonna, as you put that into place, you're gonna slightly release pressure with your thumb. That'll then allow you to press down on your plunger safety and then press back on your thumb to capture that. And now we can see that's completely in place. And your plunger, your extractor plunger, is in place to be able to be reassembled. Then it's just a matter of taking your striker, obviously striker in facing down, put that back in, and then allow the bottom protrusion to slide back into its slot, and then you're going to have the spacer sticking right out of the end. You can then take your slide stop, your back plate of your slide, and put that in here. And I like to put a little bit of pressure on it with my thumb so that then I can take my Glock tool and go ahead and press on the rear section of the spacer. Get that started. Now that's captured. And then we can press on the detent to get that the rest of the way. And then that is the internals of your slide completely reassembled. From there, it's just a matter of reinstalling your barrel. You want to come in at a downward angle, just like this. Slide that right into there, and then just push and slide your barrel back into place, and it'll catch right there. Then you're going to take, this is an aftermarket spring assembly, so this will look a little bit different than the Glock factory one that you have, but you're going to have a rounded end and a flat end, basically speaking. Round end goes right to the front of your slide. Flat end makes contact with the back of your barrel lugs. Then you're going to line up the cutouts on the bottom of your slide with the rail sections and reassemble. Reassembling will also recock your hammer, and now you're ready to go. You can then reinsert your magazine. Alright, so now we're going to go over basic cleaning of our Glock pistol. Now, since we've already safety checked this, we're going to go ahead and just field disassemble it. Pull the trigger, armorer's grip, pull your slide back, slide stop, and release your slide. Take out a recoil guide rod and spring and barrel. Now I like to use a couple of things here. I use these little blue shop towels that you can get at any automotive store or at Walmart. They're basically just extra thick, durable paper towels, so I like to use those. I also, like I said earlier in the video, I like to use both an aerosol and a liquid lubricant. And then our bore snake. We're going to use all of that to clean our firearm here. First thing we're going to do is basic general cleaning on the outside. For that, we're going to use our aerosol. And we're going to go ahead and clean all the surfaces. Comp's not too dirty, but we'll go ahead and just rub a little oil into that. Clean out the chamber in. That all nice and cleaned up. It's also good to get just some oil worked into the outside, because this is going to basically help protect your firearm, keep corrosion away from it, and just protect that finish a little bit. So we're going to wipe off the excess, get that all nice and clean. Make sure we get any fouling out of there. We don't want a lot of lubricant into the action, so we're going to make sure that any excess is cleaned up. As you can see, this one was just taken out to the range, so it's rather dirty. And as far as frequency of cleaning, Glocks don't need a ton of cleaning in my opinion. I try and clean mine about every 500 rounds, or if it's going to sit more than 3 months until I can get around to 500 rounds, which isn't often, but that's about the frequency I suggest. There's going to be differences of opinion over the internet. Go with what your gut tells you and what your research tells you, and just keep your gun clean. The cleaner you keep it, the better it's going to perform for you. So you want to make sure you get all these little sections here where you can get some built up. So I like to use the end of my bamboo skewer to just kind of loosen that up a little bit, and then you can wipe it out. There we go. That's pretty good. Now you don't want to get a lot of oil directly onto your guide rod. I like to just give it a good wipe out. Make sure there's no fouling in there. Give it a nice visual inspection. Make sure everything looks good. Now with the frame, I basically just spot check this. You're not going to get a lot of gunk and fouling in here, generally speaking. Obviously there are exceptions, but for the most part, guns that are used primarily on indoor ranges, not beaten up and in sandy or dusty, arid environments, stuff like that, you're probably not going to get a lot of gunk in here. Now if you drop this in the mud, get it into swamp water out in the bayou somewhere or something like that, you're going to have to do more detailed cleaning. But for the most part, you can just kind of wipe it out. Mine doesn't get dirty hardly ever, and I'm not going to use a ton of lubricant in here. We will see in just a minute. We're going to put some on the rails, but we're going to finish our cleaning first. The last item you want to work on is your barrel. So for cleaning, that's why I love my bore snake. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spray some lubricant. Now you'll notice I'm getting pretty good coverage in these two sections here, but I'm not putting it up here in the top section where the loop is, because this is going to help clean the excess out. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your little brass piece, drop it down in there, and then just pull your bore snake right through. And we're going to do that a couple times. Just to get all the dirt and grime out of there. And that should be all you need to do for your barrel as far as cleaning it out. Now we're going to do a little bit of lubrication. And this is the part where I like to use my dropper, is re-oiling all your surfaces. So I'm going to put just one drop on the barrel. That's all you need. We're going to work it around. Get it on the moving surfaces. And that's all you need to do for the barrel. Now, for lubrication on your frame, what I like to do is drop one drop on each one of my slide rails. And then one right back here on this little lip down into the rear of your trigger. And that's all you need for there. Then on your slide, we're going to do 4 drops of oil. Actually 5. We're going to do 5 drops of oil. You're going to put 1 drop in each corner of your interior rail. and then one on that strike surface. This is what helps strip the round out of your magazine and back in to the chamber of your weapon. Once you've done all of your oiling, you're going to reassemble. And then we're going to actuate the slide several times. What that does is that works the oil into the action. It gets it into all the bearing surfaces where movement and friction is taking place, and it's going to help distribute that oil around your firearm so that it's nice and lubricated. And then once we're done here, we're just going to give it a final wipe down. That's just for aesthetics. Get any excess off of there. Shouldn't be too much if you've lubricated according to these instructions, but just transfer from my hands is all that I've got on the outside here. And that is all you need to do to clean your firearm. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you'll get notified of all of our latest videos. You can also follow us using the social media links above on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and at gunstreamer.com.